Guys, I'm about to read to you Chapter 4 of the Great Gilly Hopkins, Sarsaparilla to Sorcery. Please make sure that you're following along in your books as I read the chapter aloud. She met Agnes Stokes the next day at recess. Agnes was a shriveled up looking little sixth grader from another class. She had long red hair that fell rather greasily to her waist, and when she sidled up to Gilly on the playground, the first thing Gilly noticed was how dirty her fingernails were. "I know who you are," the little girl said. For a moment Gilly was reminded of the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Like that little creature, this girl had power over her. She knew who Gilly was, but Gilly didn't know who she was. "Yeah," said Gilly, to let the evil little dwarf know that she wasn't interested. "That was great about you beating up 6 boys yesterday." "Yeah?" Gilly couldn't help but be a little interested. "It's all over the school." "So?" "So," the little girl leaned against the building beside her as though assuming Gilly would be pleased with her company. "So?" The girl twitched her freckled nose. "I thought me and you should get together." "How come?" Rumpelstiltskins were always after something. "No reason." The smaller girl had on a jacket, the sleeves of which were so long that they came down to her knuckles. "So I want you to start making some inferences about Agnes. What type of person is Agnes? What type of home life do you think Agnes has by the way the narrator is describing her to us, the readers?" "What's your name?" Gilly blurted out, the question half expecting the girl to refuse to answer. "Agnes Stokes." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You can call me Ag." Big deal. She was glad when the bell rang, and she could leave Agnes Stokes behind. But when she left school that afternoon, Agnes slipped out from the corner of the building and fell in step with her. "Want to come over?" she asked. "My grandma won't care." "Can't." Gilly had no intention of going into Agnes Stokes' house until she found out what Agnes Stokes was up to. People like Agnes Stokes didn't try to make friends without a reason. She walked faster, but Agnes kept up with funny little skip steps. When they got all the way up the hill to Trotter's house, Agnes actually started up the walk after Gilly. Gilly turned around fiercely. "You can't come in today." I want you to think about Mrs. Trotter's house. Why wouldn't Gilly want Agnes to come inside the house? Outside of the reason of Gilly not wanting to be friends with her, why does Gilly turn around so quickly and say, "No, you can't come in"? "How come?" "Because," said Gilly, "I live with a terrible ogre that eats up little red-headed girls in one gulp." Agnes stepped back with a startled look on her face. "Oh," she said, then she giggled nervously. "I get it, you're teasing." "Arrgh, golly gosh, you the boo!" screamed Gilly, bearing down on the smaller girl like a child-eating giant. Agnes backed away. "What?" Good. Maybe she had succeeded in unsettling Rumpelstiltskin. "Maybe tomorrow," said Gilly calmly, and marched into the house without turning around. "That you, William Ernest, honey?" It made her want to puke the way Trotter carried on over that little weirdo. Trotter came into the hall. "Oh, Gilly," she said, "you got home so quick today I thought it was William Ernest." "Yeah." Gilly started past her up the stairs. "Wait a minute, honey, you got some mail." "Mail?" It could only be from, and it was. She snatched it out of Trotter's puffy fingers and raced up the stairs, slamming the door and falling upon the bed in one motion. It was a postcard showing sunset on the ocean. Slowly she turned it over. Who do you think this postcard is from? Why is Gilly so excited to receive this postcard? My dearest Galadriel, the agency wrote me that you had moved. I wish it were to hear. I miss you. All my love, Courtney. Who is Courtney? That was all. Gilly read it again, and then a third time. No, that was not all. Up on the address side in the left-hand corner, the letters were squeezed together so you could hardly read them. An address. Her mother's address. She could go there. She could hitchhike across the country to California. She would knock on the door, her mother would open it, and Courtney would throw her arms around her and kiss her all over her face and never let her go. I wish it were to hear. I miss you. See, Courtney wanted her to come home. All my love. Inside her head, Gilly packed the brown suitcase and crept down the stairs. It was the middle of the night. Out into the darkness. No, she shivered a little. She would pick a time when Trotter was fussing over W.E. or Mr. Randolph. She'd steal some food, maybe a little money. People picked up hitchhikers all the time. She'd get to California in a few days, probably less than a week. People were always picking up hitchhikers and beating them up and killing them and pitching their dead bodies into the woods, all because she didn't have any money to buy a plane ticket or even a bus ticket. So I'm going to pause there. Remember when we learned about plot, Mrs. Marzette told us that everything in the story happens for a reason. So Gilly just said she didn't have the money to buy a plane ticket or even a bus ticket. Remember that. That's going to come back up later in this chapter. Oh, why did it have to be so hard? Other kids could be with their mothers all the time. Dumb, stupid kids who didn't even like their mothers much. While she put her head down and began to cry. She didn't mean to, but it was unfair. She hadn't even seen her mother since she was 3 years old. Her beautiful mother who missed her so much and sent her all her love. So let's take a second to pause. Gilly is 11 years old, and she just told us that she hasn't seen her mother since she was 3 years old. So think about how long it's been since Gilly has been with her mother. And she's now also showing us a different side of her personality right now with her crying. You all right, honey? Tap, tap, tap. You all right? Gilly sat up straight. Couldn't anyone have any privacy around this dump? She stuffed the postcard under her pillow and then smoothed the covers that she refused to straighten before school. She stood up at the end of the bed like a soldier on inspection, but the door didn't open. Anything I could do for you, honey? Yeah, fry yourself, lard face. Can I come in? No, shrieked Gilly, then snatched open the door. Can't you leave me alone for one stupid minute? Trotter's eyelids flapped on her face like shutters on a vacant house. You okay, honey? She repeated. I will be as soon as you get your fat self out of here. Okay. Trotter backed up slowly toward the stairs. Call me if you want anything. As an afterthought, she said, it ain't a shameful thing to need help, you know. I don't need any help. Gilly slammed the door, then yanked it open. From anybody. She slammed it shut once more. I miss you, all my love. I don't need help from anybody except from you. If I wrote you, if I asked, would you come and get me? You're the only one in the world I need. I'd be good for you, you'd see. I'd change into a whole new person. I'd turn from Bruce and Billy into gorgeous, gracious, good, glorious Galadriel, and grateful. Oh, Courtney, oh, Mother, I'd be so grateful. So right there, again, we see a very different side of Gilly that we don't see with her when she's around Mrs. Trotter or anybody else. Lord, you are so good to us, Mr. Randolph was saying the supper blessing. Yes, Lord, so very good. We have this wonderful food to eat and wonderful friends to enjoy it with. Now bless us, Lord, and make us truly, truly grateful. Amen. Amen. My Mr. Randolph, you do ask a proper blessing. Oh, Mrs. Trotter, when I sit before the spread of your table, I got so much to be thankful for. Good Lord, how is a person supposed to eat through this garbage? Well, Miss Gilly, how was school for you today? Gilly grunted. Trotter gave her a sharp look. It was okay, I guess. My, you young people have such a wonderful opportunity today. Back when I was going to school. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Trotter. What a delicious smelling plate. My. To Gilly's relief, the blind man's attention was diverted from his tale of childhood school days to the organization of the food on his plate and the eating of it, which he did with a constant murmuring of delight, dropping little bits from his mouth to his chin or tie. Disgusting. Gilly switched her attention to William Ernest, who as usual was staring at her bug-eyed. She smiled primly and mouthed, How do you do, Sweetums? Sweetums immediately choked on a carrot. He coughed until tears came out. "What's the matter, William Ernest, honey?" "I think," Gilly smiled her old lady principal smile, "the dear child is choking. It must be something he ate." "You all right, baby?" asked Trotter. W.E. nodded through his tears. "Sure?" "Maybe he needs a pat on the back," Mr. Randolph offered. "Yeah," said Gilly. "How about it, W.E., old man? Want me to swat you one?" "No, don't let her hit me." So right here we hear W.E. talking. This is one of the first times we hear him talk in this story. And the first thing he says is, "Don't let her hit me." So think about what that's telling us about William Ernest and how he feels about Gilly. "Nobody's going to hit you, honey. Everybody just wants to help." Trotter looked hard at Gilly. "Right, Gilly?" "Just want to help, little buddy." Gilly flashed her cricket politician smile. "I'm all right," the boy said in a small, strangled voice. He slid his chair a couple of inches towards Trotter's end of the table so that he was no longer directly across from Gilly. "Say, W.E.," Gilly flashed her teeth at him, "how about you and me doing a little red-hot reading after supper? You know, squeeze the old orange reader?" W.E. shook his head, his eyes pleading with Trotter to save him. "My, oh my, Mrs. Trotter, I can tell how old I am when I can't even understand the language of the young people about me," said Mr. Randolph. Trotter was looking first at W.E. and then at Gilly. "Don't fret yourself, Mr. Randolph." She leaned across the corner of the table and patted William Ernest gently, keeping her eyes on Gilly. Why do you think it keeps saying Mrs. Trotter is keeping her eyes on Gilly the whole time they're at the table? The entire time it keeps saying Mrs. Trotter is eyeing Gilly, keeps her eyes on her. Why do you think Mrs. Trotter is watching Gilly so closely right now? "Don't you fret now. Sometimes these kids will tease the buttons off a teddy bear. Ain't nothing to do with age." "Heck, I was just trying to help the kid," muttered Gilly. "He don't always know that," Trotter said, but her eyes were saying, "Like heck you were." "I got a real good idea," she went on. "They tell me, Gilly, that you are some kind of a great reader yourself. I know Mr. Randolph would like to hear you read something." The little wrinkled face brightened. My, would you do that, Miss Gilly? It would be such a pleasure to me." "Trotter, you rat. I don't have anything to read," Gilly said. "Okay, that ain't a problem. Mr. Randolph's got enough books to start a public library, haven't you, Mr. Randolph?" "Well, I do have a few," he chuckled. "Of course you got the good book right here." "What good book?" demanded Gilly, interested in spite of herself. She did like a good book. "I believe Mr. Randolph is referring to the Holy Bible." "The Bible?" Gilly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She had a vision of herself trapped forever in the dusty brown parlor reading the Bible to Trotter and Mr. Randolph. She would read on and on forever while the two of them nodded piously at each other. She jumped up from her chair. "I'll get a book," she said. "I'll run over to Mr. Randolph's and choose something." She was afraid they would try to stop her, force her to read the Bible, but they both seemed pleased and let her go. Mr. Randolph's front door was unlocked. The house was pitch black and mustier than Trotter's. Quickly Gilly pushed the light switch. Nothing happened. Of course, why should Mr. Randolph care if a bulb burned out? Why would Mr. Randolph care? Why is Mr. Randolph's house so dark? Why does it not matter to him that his house is dark and there are no light bulbs? Think about it. What do we know about Mr. Randolph? Think about it. She stumbled from the hall to where she thought the living room should be, fumbling along the wall with her fingers until she found another switch. To her relief, this one worked. Only 40 watts worth. Maybe, but there was still light. Leaning against two walls of the crooked little room were huge antique bookcases that reached the ceiling, and stacked or lying upside down, even put in backward, were books, hundreds of them. They looked old and thick with dust. It was hard to think of funny little Mr. Randolph actually reading them. She wondered how long he had been blind. She wished she could push her mind past those blank white eyes into whatever of Mr. Randolph all these books must represent. She went toward the larger shelf to the right of the door, but she felt strangely shy about actually touching the books. It was almost as though she were meddling in another person's brain. Wait, maybe they were all for show. Maybe Mr. Randolph collected books trying to act like some big-shot genius, even though he himself couldn't read a word. No one would ever catch on. They'd think he didn't read because he couldn't see. That was it, of course. She felt better. Now she was free to look at the books themselves. Without thinking, she began to straighten out the shelves as she read the titles. She saw several volumes of an encyclopedia set, an article to Boff, then Jerez to Liberty. She looked around for other volumes. It bothered her to have everything in a muddle. High on the top shelf was Sarsaparilla to Sorcery. Keep in mind, that's the name of our chapter, so something must be important about this encyclopedia, Sarsaparilla to Sorcery, because they named this the title of the book of this chapter. So let's try to figure out why this book in this encyclopedia, Sarsaparilla to Sorcery, is so important. She dragged a heavy stuffed chair backwards to the shelf and climbed up on the very top of its back. On tiptoe, leaning against the rickety lower shelves to keep from toppling, she could barely reach the book. She pulled at it with the tip of her fingers, catching it as it fell. Something fluttered to the floor as she did so. Money. She half fell, half jumped off the chair and snatched it up. 2 $5 bills had fallen out from behind Sarsaparilla to Sorcery. She put the encyclopedia down and studied the old wrinkled bills. Just when she was needing money so badly. So, here they'd come floating down like magic. $10 wouldn't get her very far, but there might be more where these came from. She climbed up again, stretching almost to the point of falling, but it was no good. Although she could just about reach the top shelf with her fingertips, she was very unsteady, and the lower shelves were much too wobbly to risk climbing. Heavy footsteps thudded across the front porch. The front door opened. "You all right, Gilly, honey?" Gilly nearly tripped over herself, leaping down and grabbing up Sarsaparilla to Sorcery from the chair seat, stretching her guts out to tip the book back into its place on the shelf, and just in time. She got down on the chair seat as Trotter appeared in the door. "You was taking so long," she said. Then Mr. Randolph remembered that maybe the bulbs was all burned out. He tends to forget since they don't really help him much. "There's a light here," Gilly snapped. "If there hadn't been, I'd have come back. I'm not retarded." "I believe you mentioned that before," said Trotter dryly. "Well, you find anything you wanted to read to Mr. Randolph?" "It's a bunch of junk." "One man's trash is another man's treasure," Trotter said in a maddeningly calm voice, wandering over to the lower shelf as she did so. She pulled out a squat leather-bound volume and blew the dust off the top. "He's got a yen for poetry, Mr. Randolph does." She handed the book up to Gilly, who was still perched on the chair. "This is one I used to try to read to him last year." But her voice sounded almost shy. "I ain't too hot of a reader myself, as you can probably guess." Gilly stepped down. She was still angry with Trotter for bursting in on her, but she was curious to know just what sort of poetry old man Randolph fancied. The Oxford Book of English Verse. She flipped it open, but it was too dark to see the words properly. "Ready to come along?" Yeah, she replied impatiently, holding her neck straight to keep from looking up at Sarsaparilla. She followed Trotter's bulk back to the house. "What did you bring?" Mr. Randolph's face looked like a child's before a wrapped-up present. He was sitting right at the edge of the big brown chair. "The Oxford Book of English Verse," Gilly mumbled. He cocked his head. "I beg your pardon?" "The poems we was reading last year, Mr. Randolph." Trotter had raised her voice as she always did, speaking to the old man. "Oh, good," he said, sliding back into the chair until his short legs no longer touched the worn rug. Gilly opened the book. She flipped through the chunk at the beginning and came to the first poem, Cuckoo Song. She read the title loudly. It was rather pleasant being able to do something well that none of the rest of them could. Then she glanced at the body of the poem. Summer is ikkemet in lut sin cuckoo, brood set and bloed med, and springet the wood new, sin cuckoo. Cuckoo was right. Wait a minute, she muttered, turning the page. Butern Mersch ain't Averill. She looked quickly at the next. Linton he's come with love to tune. And the next. Each had a bird in born breed. That fully simile is on sight. She slammed the book shut. They were obviously trying to play a trick on her, make her seem stupid. See, there was Mr. Randolph giggling to himself. It's not in English, she yelled. You're just trying to make a fool of me. No, no, Miss Gilly, nobody's trying to make a fool of you. The real old English is at the front. Try your way over. You want the Wordsworth one, Mr. Randolph asked Trotter, or do you have that by heart? Both, he said happily. Trotter came over and leaned across Gilly, who was sitting on the piano bench. I can find it, said Gilly, pulling the book out of her reach. Just tell me the name of it. William Wordsworth, said Mr. Randolph. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream. He folded his small hands across his chest, his voice no longer pinched and polite, but soft and warm. Gilly found the page and began to read. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth in every common sight to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. She stopped a minute as though to listen to her own echo. It is not now, Mr. Randolph's velvet voice prompted her. It is not now as I have been of yore, turn wheresoe'er I may by night or day. Leaning against the back of his chair, Mr. Randolph joined, and with one voice they recited, The things which I have seen I now can see no more. They continued to read that way. He would listen blissfully for a while, and then join, turning her single voice into the sound of a choir. She read, Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, and then together, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Trailing clouds of glory do we come. The music of the words rolled up and burst across Gilly like waves upon the beach. It was a long poem, 7 pages or so of small print. She couldn't understand really what it meant, but Mr. Randolph seemed to know each word, prompting her gently if she started to stumble on an unfamiliar one, and joining her powerfully and musically on his own favorite lines. They chorused the final lines. Thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joys and fears. To me the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Mr. Randolph gave a long sigh. Thank you, he said softly. She's a handsome reader, all right. Trotter was smiling proudly as though she might share the credit for Gilly's talent. So we just learned here that Gilly has a talent. So we're seeing that even though Gilly is a really mean character, there are different layers to her personality. So she was caring when she helped Mr. Randolph from falling. Now we see that she's a really good reader. There are multiple parts to her personality. She's just not a mean girl who only does mean things. She can also be very nice. The smile irritated Gilly. She was a good reader because she had set her mind to be one. The minute that dang first grade teacher had told Mrs. Dixon that she was afraid Gilly might be slow, Gilly had determined to make the old parrot choke on her crackers. And she had. By Christmas time, she was reading circles around the whole snotty class. Not that it made any difference. The teacher, Mrs. Gorman, had then explained very carefully to Mrs. Dixon that she had 25 other children to look out for, and that there was no way to set up a private reading time for one individual. Gilly would just have to learn some patience and cooperation. That was all. Well, what do you think of Mr. Wordsworth, Miss Gilly? Asked Mr. Randolph, interrupting her angry thoughts. stupid, she said to the memory of Miss Gorman rather than to him. A look of pain crossed his face. I suppose, he said in his pinched, polite voice, in just one reading one might, like here. Gilly now felt forced to justify an opinion which she didn't in the least hold. Like here at the end, the meanest flower that blows? What the heck? What's that supposed to mean? Who ever heard of a mean flower? Mr. Randolph relaxed. The word mean has more than one definition, Miss Gilly. Here the poet is talking about humility, lowliness, not, he laughed softly, not bad nature. Gilly flushed. I never saw a flower blow either. Dandelions. They all turned to look at William Ernest, not only startled by the seldom heard sound of his voice, but by the fact that all three of them had forgotten that he was even in the room. There he sat, cross-legged on the floor at the end of the couch, a nearsighted guru blinking behind his glasses. You hear that? Trotter's voice boomed with triumph. Dandelions. Ain't that the smartest thing you ever heard, ain't it? W.E. ducked his head behind the cover of the couch arm. That is probably exactly the flower that Mr. Wordsworth meant, Mr. Randolph said. Surely it is the lowliest flower of all. Meanest flower there is, agreed Trotter happily. And they sure do blow, just like William Ernest says. They blow all over the place. She turned toward Gilly as though for agreement, but at the sight of Gilly's face, the woman's smile stuck. Can I go now? Gilly's voice was sharp like the jagged edge of a tin can top. Trotter nodded. Sure, she said quietly. I do appreciate more than you know. But Gilly didn't wait to hear Mr. Randolph's appreciation. She ran up the stairs into her room. Behind the closed door she pulled the 2 bills from her pocket, and lying on the bed smoothed out the wrinkles. She would hide them beneath her underwear until she could figure out a better place, and tomorrow she would call the bus station and ask the price of a one-way ticket to San Francisco. I'm coming, Courtney, she whispered, trailing clouds of glory as I come. It was only a matter of getting back into Mr. Randolph's house and getting the rest of the money. There was sure to be more. So now, right now, we have finally finished up the exposition. We finally are seeing what Gilly's main conflict in this story is going to be. We know that she doesn't like Trotter. We know that she doesn't want to be at this foster home. But now we can finally see that her conflict is trying to get enough money so that she can go to her mother. And like I said before, at the beginning of the chapter, Gilly said, dang, I wish I had money so that I could buy a bus ticket. If you go back to page 29, it says people were always picking up hitchhikers and beating them and killing them and pitching their dead bodies into the woods, all because she didn't have money to buy a plane ticket or even a bus ticket. So now we see Gilly actually has found some money, and now she has to figure out a way to find some more. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being focused, and we will read chapter 5 through 8 next week.